Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where we bridge the gap between academics and practical marketing. Every week, we sit down and go deep behind the science that powers great marketing today. I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
And today we're sitting with Joe Arden, strategist extraordinaire, regular contributor to Campaign magazine, and a wonderful thought leader in our industry. Let's get into it.
Hi.
Joe, welcome to Behavioral Science for Brands.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm so excited. Well, excited to see you again, Richard, after a few years, but to meet you, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
We're thrilled that you're here. And in our pre-chat before we clicked record, we were having such an interesting, wide-ranging discussion. I can't wait for everybody to hear it. But before we get into our conversation, if you will indulge me, I'd just like to give our listeners a little background on you because it's so helpful for people to understand who's on the show and where they're speaking from. So today you're Chief Strategy Officer at AMV BBDO, and you've had a wonderful career leading strategy at some of the UK's best shops, Ogilvy, Publicis, MullenLowe, and a number of independent agencies. Mm-hmm. You're a regular contributor to Campaign with thought leaderships about brands and the strategy industry. And to me, it's been so lovely to learn about what you've done outside of your day job. You've worked with the WACL on driving gender equality, with the APG on supporting young strategists, mentoring young women, and in 2024, you became the convener of the IPA Effectiveness Awards. So thank you for being with us. We're excited to chat, and our listeners, like all humans, love stories. So maybe you could tell us, how did you get interested in strategy for brands? How did you get interested in advertising as an industry? How did you learn about this as a field?
Well, it's a long story, and I'm going to try and keep it brief so that we don't bore everybody to tears. Where I first became interested in advertising in a way which has brought me round to one of the things we'll talk about today. So as a child, growing up in the northwest of England in the 70s and 80s, there was an ad on TV, which was, picture the scene, there was a dad in the garden, he's digging some of the earth. A daughter is upstairs and she's got a huge dictionary, and she leafs through the pages and finds cancer in the dictionary as dad's outside and he's coughing. And the ad is about stopping smoking. And I can remember watching the ad, and as a daughter of two parents who smoked, my dad a pipe and my mum cigarettes, I can remember thinking, that's awful and they should stop. But also, really this like kinetic feeling of how the ad made me change my views and change my motive to get them to behave differently. And it's, I was probably only about 8, 9, 10 at the time, but it stuck with me, and that still stuck with me. So when I got to work on stop smoking campaigns like 20 years after that, I just thought it was such a privilege, and that's why we're going to talk about one of those campaigns today.
It's amazing the emotional power advertising can have. Now that you are in the industry, what do you think it was about that ad that stuck with you all these years? Why? What do you think they did that was so impactful?
I think it was at the time in the UK, people never said cancer. They always said the big C. It was that weird era where we didn't like to put a name on it, I guess, through fear of jinxing ourselves. So it was quite powerful that it actually said that. But more than the content of it, and I've not been able to find it online since I've searched so much for it, but more than the actuality of what it said in the script, it was the feeling, it was the pace, it was the music, it was the casting, everything about it created this mood, this sort of mood of sort of slightly foreboding doom, and then a lift at the end. I can remember that there was a solution, and it probably was a call line at the time, or maybe a writing off for a pack of something. But I do remember this sort of feeling of hope. So, and we know that, don't we? We know that emotions drive our responses. And when I think about the ad, I think about how I felt, not what I took intellectually from it. And yeah, what an amazing tool to have at our hands, that we can make people feel like that, and get them to sort of do something differently as a result. It's such a privilege.
Richard and I often talk about, Daniel Kahneman's work and how much is, emotionally led, subconscious, how much is rational and logic decision driven. And hearing you talk about the ad, it was a living experience of that, which is it really was emotionally driven and resonant, and that's what you keep with you today. And so it's a lovely way into talking about behavioral science and talking about why it's
Yeah,
important for marketing and advertising.
yeah,
um, so we've asked you to play a little game as part of today's episode. Could you pick campaigns that you love and that you think can teach us something about behavioral science? And
yeah.
you've chosen three. And the first one couldn't be a better lead-in from your opening story. So can you tell us a little bit about the campaign, about what it was about, and then maybe we can then talk a little bit about the behavioral science that was powering it.
Yes, yes, perfect. And I'm really thrilled to have two absolute experts to talk about this with, because the campaign I want to talk about is Stoptober. The thing that I always caveat when I talk about Stoptober is that it was the product of many people's incredible hard work and insight. So I never claim it. I was definitely involved in it and was really happy to be. But there's a lot of people that were part of that team, not least the brilliant marketing lead, Sheila Mitchell, who was the Public Health England lead on it, exceptional marketeer. It was, in quick summary, we've done a lot of work from a public health standpoint to get people to stop smoking. Many campaigns I'd worked on before this, and they'd all been successful in various ways, and they tended to balance hope and harm. So, all the way through, we talked about that harm about the cigarettes, hope that you can quit. Stoptober was the first time that we went really big on hope in mainline communications. And so it's 2012. They've kind of rejigged it a bit over the years, and actually this time it's back and feels really great again. I've been sort of following what's going on with it in 2025. But there's so many behavioural techniques embedded in it. I think some of them we were aware of and we planned into it at the time. I think some were happy chances. And it's interesting to look back on it and to hear other people talk about the principles that we deployed, because it was very clever, but it was also extremely simple. And I guess that's the alchemy that we all search for every day, isn't it? To be able to get something which really works, but you don't need to be a PhD to understand why. And I think Stoptober is an excellent example of that. Also, lots of people successfully quit smoking as a result of it, and that is ultimately what we're here to do. Yeah.
Joe, quite a lot of listeners are American, so if someone's never heard of Stoptober, what was the kind of key thing that you? And they might be able to guess from the name a little bit, but what was the kind of key thing that you did?
Yeah, so Stoptober, it was, yes, as you might guess from the name, it was getting people to stop smoking in October. And it was a 28-day quit attempt. One of the really brilliant things about it is that we had this piece of data, which is that if you stop smoking for 28 days, you were 4 times more likely to quit. I can remember at the time, like a funny research element is that we were a bit worried that people would go, 4 times more likely than what? What's the baseline? Anyway, people don't, because what they really want is a sense of hope, like a silver bullet that you are going to be able to quit. So the 4 times message was enough in its own right. And the unusual thing about it, we had something in the UK called No Smoking Day. British Heart Foundation had run that for many years. It was a 1-day quit attempt. And there was some good evidence, actually, that did motivate those who were sort of keen to quit to get started. It was like a line in the sand. What Stoptober did, though, is to expand that over a full 28-day period and sort of chunked up the things that you could expect over the whole month. Which was useful for people who needed that sort of daily validation that they were doing okay, that they could get to the next day. The other part of it was that it was a mass quit attempt, and we called it, radical mass action. So part of the joy of it was that people knew everybody else was giving it a go at the same time. it was 2012 was a different period, you know, and one of the things that we did with it is we had a text line, which we absolutely loved. So people used to text Stoptober as if it was a person at the end of it and say things like, "Good night, Stoptober, another day without smoking." And it was just adorable that people would, you know, like volunteer that sort of relationship with a campaign. It was a campaign. So, there was various elements to it. It was meant to feel like a grassroots movement, and right from the off, we had all sorts of partners involved. So all of our big retail pharmacists were involved, you know, from Asda, Tesco's, but also people like Boots, high street chemists, and we had all of the local authorities in the UK, so people who run the communities around the UK, and then all sorts of other organisations too, people who had a valid reason to be invested in people's quit attempts.
Yeah. As you said, I think there's so many interesting things going on there.
Yeah.
The phrase that you had of radical mass action, though, I think
Mm.
is fascinating, because there's one theme or set of experiments in behavioral science that is shown to work again and again and again. It's this idea of social proof. So the argument
Mm,
that humans are a herd species, we're a deeply social animal, and if we think lots of other people are behaving in a particular way, we at least consider it. So,
yeah,
you know, you can imagine an alternate universe. Government tries to get people to quit with, you know, an ongoing annual campaign, reaching people at disparate moments, different times, but getting everyone to quit at the same time, I think then has a snowball effect. If we think our neighbours are all doing it, social proof suggests we are much more likely to try so ourselves. So I think that idea of the mass radical action is super interesting.
yeah, and it was an interesting element to it because in all of the research that we'd done for I would say the sort of 4 or 5 years previously on previous campaigns, one of the things that came out really clearly is that quitters often try and quit secretly,
Mm.
because telling people that you're quitting smoking raises the stakes. You know, you've already created a group of people that you will let down if you don't succeed. And so Stoptober was a risk in one way because we were making it purposely very public. But I think the idea that we made it very, very public almost neutralized this sort of high stakesness that we would create if it was in smaller cohorts. So it was an interesting experiment which did really pay off. And we did it knowing that for some people, saying I'm doing Stoptober would raise the stakes. But I think it was so big that that was
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, I hadn't realised that that kind of element. There are some evidence. There is some evidence from Steve Martin, at Columbia University, author of
Yeah.
Messengers, in the power of getting people to make a public commitment. So, as you say,
Mm.
there is a risk that it might put some people off, but once they've made that public commitment, they're more likely to follow through. So, he did a
Yeah.
study back in 2012 where he tried to encourage people to turn up to their doctor's appointments, and previously the receptionist just gave people a card saying their, you know, time and date of when they should
Yeah.
turn up. But Steve Martin's intervention was to get the receptionist to hand over a blank piece of card and then get the patient to write their own time and date down. And what he found is when you did that, you got this 18% decline in no shows. And his argument was consistency is a big driver of behavior.
Yeah.
But so his argument is, look, we don't, if we say something, if we do something, we don't want to behave differently to what our past selves did.
Yeah.
But his argument is you only tap into this bias if there's a degree of activeness. So if someone
Right.
passively thinks to themselves, I will turn up to an appointment, it doesn't harness consistency. But if they've said out loud, or in his case, written it down, then you get this bias working in your favor. So once you've got people to get through that threshold,
Yeah.
you've used the scale to make them prepared to make the commitment, then that bias consistency should increase the probability they follow through. So I think that's another lovely behavioral science angle I hadn't really considered beforehand.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So yeah, so the idea that people would say I'm doing Stoptober was more active than them just kind of quitting smoking. People sort of notice it, but they've not said it out loud. So yeah, so it's actually the declaration of it worked in our
Mm.
favor, I suppose. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah.
W- We're going to put the campaign and the links in our show notes so everybody can look at the whole book of work and then clue into this conversation. Before we go to the next case study, I had one more question when I
Yeah.
went through it as an American. that was struck me. And it's on the NHS website right now. So when people click, they'll see it. Halfway down the page, there's a section called "What Happens When You Quit," and it tells you 4 hours your body starts to heal. In 12 hours, you start to have better lung capacity. 48
Mm.
hours, your heart is pumping blood better. Whatever. It's got maybe 6 different time-based elements up to 28 days. Good to know
Yeah.
that's why you did it that way, of why I'm healing my body. And what struck me as I read it was I'm reading this and I'm thinking I'm never going to unsee what they've shared here. But it is rather rational and logical. Like I
Mhm.
knew smoking was bad for me already. And so I wonder if either of you have any insight into why sharing those time-based healing moments, might be effective or maybe is not that effective. But it made a big impact on me when I read it in prep for today's interview, and it stuck with me even through our conversation. Any thoughts, Joe, on what might have why that was a part of the campaign, or what you think it might do as part of the campaign?
Yeah, I think there's a few bits, and actually in the first year, maybe the first 2 years even of the campaign, we put those messages in paid media, which was a very interesting way to use paid. So they were digital posters, where you could literally track, 2nd of October, people would collectively see a message about what was happening in their body, and they did work really well. I think one of the reasons that they were successful is people who want to quit smoking, one of the things that puts them off is that the upside feels so far in the future.
Mm.
And Richard will be able to tell you all the sciencey stuff on this. But I can remember that there was a real need to give people some fairly immediate happy news. Your taste buds are getting better, or your lung capacity is improving, and all of that stuff being in the next couple of weeks, as opposed to back in the day, there used to be some data. The reason I stopped smoking myself actually was because there was this piece of data, which was if you stopped smoking by 30, your body had the chance to recover to non-smoker levels. So I stopped when I was 29 and a half. But that took a bit of willpower. Whereas, saying to somebody, you could taste a great curry in 3 days' time, feels like it's a very motivating thing. So it's rational, but people automatically connect it with an emotional upside. But Richard will know a better answer, I think.
I'm
No, I
thinking
think
about it
that's
from the same angle as you, but thinking what I really liked about it is there's this succession of
Mm,
deadlines that or endpoints. I've only got to get through 4 hours, and then my taste buds improve. 12 hours, and my lung gets better. And we will put the right details in the show notes. But from memory, I think there was a guy called Clark Hull. It's always hard to remember someone who has a first name
yeah.
plus a surname. Um, and he came up with something called the gold gradient hypothesis. And I think the original studies were with rats. So you put a rat in a maze, there was a bit of
Yeah.
cheese at the very end. And what he saw was that the rat speed changes. So it gets quicker as it gets closer to its goal. So it speeds up at the end of the maze. And that idea that was first shown in animals is shown in humans as well. So as we approach a goal, we have become more motivated to get that great sense of completion. So I think the lovely thing, which again I completely missed until you said it, was by giving people this succession of different, meaningful, and powerful goals, you've constantly got that positivity of completion. So again, I think there's something absolutely lovely here. And it's a
Yeah.
brilliant example of how you can use multiple biases and multiple principles to get an additive cumulative effect.
Yeah, at the same time, it's kind of like with I guess the logic behind loyalty cards at coffee shops, isn't it? Or spend £20 more and you'll get free shipping. It's that same effect.
Yeah, but Stoptober does it, to a much higher degree, because a loyalty card, you have to get to 10. It'd be as if Saint Starbucks gave you a little something after 2, a little something after 4,
Yeah.
and in your case, it was free to give. It was
Yes.
information and positive feeling rather than any kind of cash benefit. So,
Yeah.
so I think it's a lovely example.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's good.
The one big thing that we haven't talked about with Stoptober, and I was saving this because I think it's even more apparent when we talk about your next principle or your next
Yes.
campaign. So we're going from smoking to STIs. This sounds like a kind of ridiculously hedonistic night in the 80s. Do you want to tell us about the New Zealand herpes campaign?
I do, and it's a really great watch. So I'd encourage everybody to, like, click on the links in the show notes and have a watch of it, because it is a delightful piece of work from a conceptual perspective and a craft one. It's really well done. So yeah, this is from New Zealand. They have actually got quite a big problem with herpes. That's one of the things that I found out when I was doing the revision. Like, people tend to have more herpes of all the variants than in lots of other countries. Don't know the reason for that. But this was a public health campaign which I thought was joyful in the way that it tackled the topic. Loads of like reframing from stigma and shame into something that you should talk about. And I really enjoyed that they, tongue in cheek, made it something to be proud of, not something to hide. All of it is geared towards getting people to find out more about how they can prevent it and the kind of measures they should take to stop the spread. So it's got really good, solid, like, public health underpinning, but wrapped in like loads of brilliant behavior change tactics. And my favorite of them all, and maybe this is what you're going to point out, Richard, is the messenger effect. Like, they could not have gone bigger on who fronted that campaign for them. And I really like it when people use that particular technique. I've done a lot of partnership marketing in my time, and the messenger is the core principle of that. Get a better voice to intermediate the difficult conversation.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking of something else, but the messenger effect, I think, is definitely there. So for people who aren't familiar with it, it's this idea that who says something can be as important as what's said. So the original study goes back to 1953, I think. Hovland and Weiss at Yale University, really clever study. They go out, they stop people on the street, and they pick a topical matter of the day, like, do you think a nuclear submarine can be built in the next year? People are quizzed whether they think it's yes or no, if it's possible or impossible. And then after they've given their answer, 4 days later, they are invited back to the psychologist's lab. And when they arrive, on the table in front of them, there is a sheet of A4 paper with a very powerfully argued, logical bit of text saying why that the participant is completely wrong. So if I'd said, yes, the submarine can be built, very powerful argument about why it was ridiculous, it couldn't be built. Now, they then question everyone as to how far they've changed their beliefs. And the twist in the experiment is sometimes the argument is attributed to a credible source. So I think in that case, the submarine, it was Oppenheimer, the physicist. Other times, the argument is attributed to an uncredible source, like Pravda, the Russian newspaper.
Right.
And what the psychologists find is that low credibility source, 7% of people change their minds. High credibility source, 23% change their minds. And the key thing to remember here is everyone reads exactly the same logical argument. All that's changing is who it's attributed to. And you see this, 3.5-fold variance in persuasive power. So that was the original research by Hovland and Weiss into this idea they called the messenger effect. And then I think what's interesting is later people have shown there are lots of different types of messengers you can think about using. So you could go down the route of credibility, or you could go down a neutral route, get someone else to say it, or you could go down a relatable route and make sure the spokesman is someone that the audience relates to, links to. So whether it's credibility, neutrality, or relatability, these seem to be the three big factors of what makes for a persuasive messenger. And I guess from your description with the New Zealand campaign, there's an awful lot of neutrality. It's not from the health service, it's from World Cup winning rugby manager. So I think that's the kind of element maybe there. You could argue maybe relatability as well. So you've got different spokespeople for different kind of segments of society.
Exactly. And I like the messenger effect because it's so like innate to all of us. All of us as children have decided who's best to tell the parents you've done something wrong. And I think And I think it's hardwired into us to understand that who the message comes from has a massive material impact on how it's received. So I love it for that. And obviously communications and marketing, we apply it all the time. But I thought the New Zealand work did that especially well. I mean, and I also love it when celebrities lend their voice to something really important. And I thought they did a great job of it.
Yeah, and it's such an easily overlooked piece. It can be very easy to think, well, we just have to make our content as powerful as possible. Well, the messenger effect would say, well, of course that's the case, but on top of that, one of the first things you should think about is who is the ideal vehicle for your message, and it might
Yeah.
not be the brand in question.
Yeah. So what
So I think
were you going to say?
oh,
Tell me.
yeah, what I was going to say. So messenger effects, I think, is absolutely core. But the one that I think links Stoptober and the herpes campaign, especially when you opened with the 1970s example,
Yes.
because in the 1970s, an awful lot of public service announcements in Britain really tried to scare people. Not necessarily the one you gave, but a lot of them were deeply scary. What's so interesting about Stoptober and herpes is, in your words, they lean into hope. They're positive. The New Zealand one is really humorous, and I think that is key often to a public health message. There's an idea called the ostrich effect that if you scare people, there is a danger that rather than people changing the underlying problem, stopping smoking or stopping having unprotected sex, there's an argument that instead they metaphorically put their heads in the sand.
Yeah.
They just ignore messaging that makes them feel uncomfortable. So we turn away from what makes us uncomfortable. And I think what's so clever in the examples you've mentioned is that they avoid that negativity. They actively make you want to engage through humor with the New Zealand campaign.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think I'm quite attracted to that kind of approach as well. I mean, and it's not the only way of doing it, as you say. We've got a great legacy in this country of public health advertising, which has worked and been terrifying. The AIDS campaigns were terrifying and worked. There was a brilliant report that I found that said that our AIDS campaigns in the UK had a very strong correlation with the reduced number of instances compared with other communities of a similar size. But I like the idea of using, humour and levity to land a message which is serious. And I think that there's a generational thing with that as well. I think the younger audiences that we appeal to now don't want to be terrified with things. I think they're not shy of the facts, and I don't think they are averse to hearing the home truth, but I think they like it to be wrapped in something which feels like it's got a solution and a positive upside to it.
Yeah,
It's interesting in the campaign. Oh, just to add to this connective tissue, a lot of the campaign starts with a TV commercial that is a throwback to what looks like the 70s or 80s. A lot of the creative in the herpes campaign starts with a old-timey TV spot before you see the rugby coach or before the messengers or influencers make their statement. Do you know why that was part of the creative conceit, or what do you think that does to help the effectiveness of the campaign?
My view, I have thought about this a lot, and I think there was a creative choice there, which was about how to make it entertaining. But I also think there is a little bit of like making the audience feel comfortable, so almost diffusing the whole thing and giving yourself permission to land the message in the seconds that follow. By like, let's just lower the stakes. This is going to be fine. It's a humorous ad. So I think there is an element of that in there. From a creative perspective, nostalgia is an incredible way to get people to lean into the content that you're sharing. So I imagine that's why that choice was made. And I think there is also something about sending up the spoof, like public health video, is, again, a way to get lots of information across, but in a way which is palatable and acceptable and people can tune in. I don't know, did you think the same, Richard?
I've mainly thought of it as you say, a route to making it entertaining.
Mm.
The nostalgia piece is fascinating. So I've seen research. I think we might have talked about it when we did the pumpkin spice latte episode. There's some research. Lassalita, I think, was
Yeah.
the psychologist, who showed that if you get people to reflect on special moments in the past, or what things were like as a child, their price sensitivity drops. But I haven't seen anything on the increased willingness to engage with nostalgic ads. But
Yeah.
what I've done is made a note to research just that, because I wonder if it's something we don't discuss enough as
Um,
agencies or marketers, and I wonder if there's more research out there that we're not aware of. So that is my action, to go and find out more about
And
nostalgia.
perhaps the willingness to, like, your reduction in price sensitivity is an outcome, but not the root. That like something else is happening. And then, yeah, I'm
yeah.
less price sensitive, but perhaps there's more believability, or, like there's something else happening.
I think you might be right, because from memory, the Lassalita explanation is that there's two ways of people thinking about situations. There's either a kind of monetary mindset or one of social connectedness. And by referring to childhood, that social connectedness becomes dominant and matters of money recede. I mean, it feels, I don't know, vaguely plausible, but I've never 100% bought into it. So there might be, as you said, there's more to it. So I think that's definitely an area to look into more.
Well, I look forward to finding out what you found out.
Yeah.
We'll have to have you back on, Joe. And that
Yeah.
way we can talk about it. Well, you gave us homework, and like
Yeah.
good students, we will go and do our homework and come back. We promised listeners 3, but
Yeah.
I think I'm going to cut us at 2. Maybe we can convince you to come back on at another time. We'd love to talk more about the last example, and we'd love to talk more about this. But as we wrap up, we always ask our guests, if you could give one piece of advice to those that want to make their communication effective, to brands that are trying to turn consumers into action, what's a thought that you might have to leave our listeners with?
Well, my thought would be tune into how you yourself think and feel and make decisions. And I think as a start point, that is where we should all look. I think we can overcomplicate things and, make things overly academic, intellectualized. We all know what goes on in our own bodies and how we are impulsive and irrational. And I think if marketers can tune more into that and try and stop themselves being overly logical about what they believe should happen in a perfect world, they won't go far wrong.
I can't think of a better argument for behavioral science. Don't post-rationalize. Don't overthink it. Look at your actions and let
Yes.
that be your guide. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a brilliant thing to leave everyone with.
Yeah, that idea of focusing on what actually influences people rather than what should influence them, I think that is you could sum up the entire field of behavioral science in that sense.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Joe,
Good.
thank you for joining us today. For our listeners at home, you'll find all of our show notes at theconsumerbehaviorlab.com. You'll be able to leave comments, share this with those that you think will find it interesting. And thank you again for being with us today and sharing your thoughts with us. It was a lovely conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me. And it was brilliant. Lovely to discuss those campaigns with both of you guys.
Thank you. Until next time, I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
Thanks for listening.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Method 1. Recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in America for the 3rd year in a row, featured on Inc.'s 5,000 list. Method 1 is a proudly independent creative and media agency grounded in behavioral science. They exist to make brands irresistible, helping people discover products, services, and experiences that bring moments of joy to their lives. As behavior change experts, Method 1 creates emotional connections that drive true brand value for their clients, focusing primarily with indulgence brands in the CPG space. Find out more at method1.com.